if you're not hopping in. Awesome. Thank you. So this is something that I've gotten a lot of questions on, especially this time of year. Um, somebody put it really well the other day. It's like, like how do I show up as my best self in 2025? And really the answer is by starting now. And it doesn't necessarily have to be with specific training, but a lot of where we show up as our best selves comes from intentionality. So that's really what I'm hoping to kind of move in the direction of today is you may leave today with more questions than you came with, but hopefully those questions are more honed in the direction of getting you to a solution for how you can structure your race season. And then again, kind of planning, begin with the end in mind is something else that um, that's how we roll with a lot of these things is okay, so you've got this goal. How do we backwards plan from that to where we're currently, standing to make sure that we're moving forward towards that goal? Again, first off with intentionality, but like with a roadmap, with, parameters that define how we're measuring success, all of these things that really inform how we're moving forward, but we begin by working backwards. Um, so just in case anybody is newer, just wanted to introduce myself real quick, just in case. My name is Coral Owen. I'm the head coach for Team Babe Athletics. Babe is an acronym, be a badass every day. Show up as your best self for yourself each day, and that can look different every day. It's not necessarily, gas pedal to the floor every day. So just kind of level set about that's kind of how we're showing up today in this discussion. I'm also the race director for the Tampa Bay Babes Triathlon. It's a women's only sprint tri here in Tampa Bay. I also am mom hat. I would be remiss not to mention that. That also informs a lot of how I show up in this space these days. I've been coaching triathlon and swimming for over 15 years. I've also been racing in many different settings from collegiate to age group to long course to kind of like in the just finishing, enjoying, moving the body postpartum, a lot of different ways that I've shown up in the sport. So it's really just a joy to be able to, talk with you guys. And my inbox is always open. If you have any questions, between coach Q&As, webinars, things that you don't want to share, in the Facebook community, please know that you can always reach out. And that's, I think, one of the most powerful things about this women's space that we have and are cultivating is that we can just support each other along the way. Um, so just some fun, like get to know you stuff to kick things off. If y'all have the ability to just drop in the chat pod, you can type or you can just drop an emoji. What's your favorite? Swim, bike, run? Just to get a feel for how everybody's kind of, rocking in today. Okay, a lot of runners. So far, 100%. One is offsetting with a swim and a bike. Super fun. Maybe a few folks are undecided, and that is okay too. All right, Lily, awesome. Really glad you're enjoying the bike. Good stuff. So just keeping it fun. Whoop, did not mean to move that way. And something a little bit more specific to today, drop red, green, yellow. How are you feeling right at this moment about your game plan for 2025? And if you don't have one, that's okay too. All right, got some yellows. Helen, you don't have one, that's okay. Sunshiny yellow. I like the optimism, Katie. Awesome. Y'all can keep dropping those in there. So cool. Well, I figure everybody probably you're here because you got some questions. And again, so as we move through, please don't hesitate. So I can see the chat pod. I'm going to keep it up. So again, if if you have questions as we're going through, really today is a discussion, not a push the information out in one direction only. Um, so let's get a little bit of a sense for where we're going today. Again, we could have like a whole webinar series about the nitty gritty of what constructing a season looks like. There are so many considerations that go into it. And this is really where there's kind of this like art to science blend of planning the season, because a lot of it is just knowing yourself. And then, if you have a sounding board or just kind of, spitballing, like, what does this look like? There's so much nuance, and no two race plans or season plans will look the same for any two athletes. So just some like general waypoints that we're heading today. The importance of setting goals and priorities, really prioritizing gives you that intentionality. Understanding just this general concept of training blocks that we'll talk about, managing your calendar and all of the other things that reside on your calendar other than just swim, bike, run life. And then how are we going to put it into action and also make sure that we are defining success? And this is a really key piece to kind of bring it home. So just some waypoints for y'all to track on today. So why are we setting goals? I've already touched on this. It gives you intention, and it also gives you a direction to move in. If we don't have something on the calendar, you can still have direction and intentionality to your season. But we just, again, have to get clear on what those kind of guiding factors are. So if you're not necessarily in a race specific build, this is more of a just kind of sidebar for today's discussion. There are lots of different ways that you can anchor your season. It doesn't necessarily have to be a finish line goal. Maybe it is just a rebuild. Like I know we've got several people that are either, tuning in right now or hopefully watching the recording later, who mentioned they're coming back from injury. Maybe you are in a rebuild season, or the front half of your season is dedicated to this rebuild and kind of base building, super low key. That is still intention. It's still direction. Maybe it's skill building. Maybe it's cultivating mindset. Maybe it's really understanding how you're fueling your body for success. Yeah. So Tracy, 3 months total hip post op. Yeah. So I'm speaking to you. So, so considering this piece, you don't have to be, and I encourage you not to be in a race focused build all season long. If any of these considerations that I've just, or like kind of season anchors that I've just mentioned jump out to you, is like, oh, like that sounds like where I'm at in my life right now. Maybe you're looking more at a hybrid of like, this is how you like begin your season, and then you can figure out how you're rolling into a race specific build if that is something that you feel so moved to do. So that's a really good roll into this next consideration is, what are we considering when we're defining and setting these goals and priorities? There are so many opinions out there about what you should do, be, aim towards as a triathlete, an endurance athlete, a multi-sport athlete. The only opinion that matters truly is yours. You're the one that is making the time commitment and, the energetic commitment. And there are these, kind of time costs or opportunity costs that we, make compromises with other things that matter to us when we are putting forth effort to maintain our health, pursue a race goal, all of these things. So you have to make sure that you're showing up for something that really matters to you, something that speaks to your soul. Does it excite you? Is it going to help you grow into this next version of yourself? And it doesn't have to be, longer, faster, whatever. It just has to be something that moves you, that excites you. And hopefully at some level, it brings you joy to pursue these things. That's, another just kind of sidebar mention here. That is one of the really key pieces that we work at this intersection, under Team Babe. Performance, yes, that's awesome, but performance and joy, that's really where the magic happens, because we just as a human, I think there's a lot that's lost in this if we just are looking at numbers. And again, not to say that those aren't worthy goals, but when we, dovetail it with this like curiosity and the joy aspects, that's really what makes it sustainable, makes it joyful, wraps it in, community and all of these like adventurous things that really support performance as well. Um, so, and all right, so just like considering those things, like what matters to you, what's exciting you, what's going to help you grow. And it doesn't have to be the same thing season over season either. Okay. So don't feel anchored to like where you've been as something that, means like you have to keep moving in that direction. If you want to pivot, please let this be your permission. If you need to like pursue a different direction, like by all means, be expansive, be diverse, have variety, and just go in the direction of your dreams. Um, Another thing to consider when figuring out like what are your priorities and your goals, what's your angle? And it doesn't have to be the same angle. Like if you have several goals that you're pursuing throughout the course of your season, is it a complete, or I call it like to call us like a finish strong? Is it compete? Are you a little bit more focused on like the performance side of things? And compete, it doesn't necessarily have to be with other racers. It can be with yourself. Personal best, just how are you wanting to show up on that start line as you work your way to the finish on that day of? Um, and then this is really we're starting in more in the nitty gritty here. If you've got, multitude of events, races, however you're framing those, we need to start stacking and prioritizing. If you've only got like two things on your calendar, awesome. Maybe those are both what we call A races. Those are your main focal points that are anchoring and driving your season and your training. As we, start to layer on other races, they maybe are not like main character roles. Maybe they're more like supporting or like just like general cast, if you will. So these main focus races, these are ones that we're like, really anchoring our training around. We're doing a big taper ahead of time, making sure that we're rested, and showing up just with the full, scope and depth of what we're able to bring on to race day. Our B races, these can be training races that support the build to, like a bigger event. So an example here might be, say you're working towards a 70.3, which I know a lot of you are. Maybe you have an Olympic distance. So like in practice, if you're doing Chattanooga 70.3 with us in May, I've gotten a lot of questions specifically like, can St. Anthony's Olympics still fit in my training scope? That race falls typically in the last, week or so of May. That's actually a really good race stack. So long as Chattanooga 7.3, like that's your A race. Are we working our way backwards, 4-ish weeks out to St. Anthony's, where that's an Olympic distance? You're taking it at a half iron pacing, not going, full bore, testing out your kit, your race day strategy for your 70.3, all of these things. So that kind of gives you a sense of like a B to A build. And then C stuff, this is stuff that we're not tapering for. Maybe it's a 5K in the middle of, a sprint race build, something like that, more like a supported training day, if you will. So just that was a lot of unpacking, but just some good kind of level set to give you guys some things to think about. So let's talk a little bit more about these fundamental building blocks of what comprises a plan. Okay. So this is again like very general. We have what's called periodization. All right. So we're not full bore, high intensity focused, race intensity all year long. And we are also incorporating, so strength training is a really big focus for how we write plans as well. So not just swim, bike, run, but we can also periodize our strength as well in and amongst this discussion. So it's again just kind of a footnote, but a few kind of key building blocks throughout a season plan or a race build is going to be like your base. And these are called different things in different kind of scopes of thought. So if you've got different terminology, just know we're kind of probably talking about the same thing. It's just more the concept that I'm getting at. So a base can be developing your aerobic fitness. That consists of a lot of easy work. There's probably some skills-based stuff in here as well. And we'll talk about limiters here as well, but kind of bringing up any skill sets that need a little bit of polishing, if you will. All of this stuff happens in the base phase. And the base phase can be anywhere from, if you're just getting into things, maybe you're doing a longer base phase of several months. If you've just been kind of generally doing a maintenance plan in between race focuses or race builds, you might, just kind of have a perpetual base phase until you hit a race specific or a base phase until you hit a race specific build. And so that takes us into build. This is more like strength power. We start really kind of adding some really nice quality work into the swim, bike, run, or whatever, endurance modality you're utilizing or focusing on. As we get into peak, this is really kind of like the creme de la creme of, how we're wanting to show up in race day. We're replicating that race intensity or, format in these peak sessions. Peak phase is probably only going to last, depending on the race, month, 6 weeks. We don't stay there too long because it is a really high volume comparatively. And when I say high, low, etc., this is all relative to what you've been doing, right? All of these things look very different for everybody. And then taper, this is anywhere from a week to a few. We usually don't do anything more than maybe 2 or 3 for something big like a full. Something like a sprint, we might do 4 to 7 days. Just again, how quickly do athletes shed fatigue and recover? It differs from person to person, also depending on like your life factors that you've got going on externally. Then we race. And then this is one of the often overlooked pieces here, recovery. We have to have some downtime, whether it is just physical, but often there's a mental component here too, that sometimes we don't realize how just, kind of dull maybe our mindset or our energy has become. Because these bigger race focuses do take a lot of focus, that when you're in it, you don't necessarily realize, that you're kind of using up that bandwidth. So when you come down off of your like key A race for the season, or maybe you've got a couple peaks in there, because you can move through this a couple times if you're doing something like under full distance or like 50K, 50 miler, these shorter races, we can peak several times throughout the year. Make sure that you're taking at least one unstructured week after these really big races for something like, again, like these big chonky races, like a full or a half. Maybe we are taking couple of 4 weeks even, to not just, we don't necessarily have to sit on the couch and be a potato, but just moving gently with, our energy, however we want to show up, what sounds good, fun, doing non-swim bike run things, holding space for that is really, really important. And then just some other considerations for a training plan, not just focusing on the swim, bike, run, strength stuff, but, again, there's a lot of nuance and individuality that comes in here. So making sure that it's sustainable, like, cool, you might want to train 10, 15 hours a week, but if you've only got 6 to 7, realistically, like that's a mismatch. So we want to make sure that we're working within the parameters that we have available. That's not going to totally turn us inside out week over week. We have to make sure that this is something that we can consistently hold space for, because if we can't show up consistently, I'd rather have an athlete do 70% of the volume that they would like to do or could possibly sustain if they had more time, and be able to hit that, kind of volume consistently. You're going to move much more efficiently in the direction that you want to go at a lower volume that you can maintain consistently, versus setting like higher, training volume goals and being very sporadic, one day here, and having holes and pockets in there. So hope that makes sense. Next thing, you want to make sure it's stepwise. You shouldn't go from 0 to 60, in the span of 1 week. There should be this like gradual increase of whether it is volume, intensity, frequency of training, sessions. Bless you, Ellen. And let's say you're currently training, 2 to 3 days a week. Going in immediately and doing having a plan that starts at 5 to 6 days a week, that's going to blow you out of the water. You may not feel it the first week, 2 weeks, but as you get along, might be a little bit of a flashpoint where we're like, whew, I am tired. We want to start where we're at and make sure that we're progressing. And this is something else too, as we look at what period we're starting in, or what macro cycle, which is what these periods are sometimes referred to as, making sure that we have a long enough base season where if we need to be at 5 to 6 days a week of consistent training before we hit the build, but we're only at 2, giving yourself ample time to move through that. Maybe it's 3-4 months of just general base building before we have the chops or that foundation solid enough to where we jump into a race specific build. Something else, and this is something that I will beat the drum on till the cows come home: performance and health. We never, ever, ever sacrifice our well-being. And by health, I mean physical, of course, but energetic, emotional, mental. We have to be a rock solid human to support performance goals. If we don't have a plan that is meeting both of those goals, we're not doing it right, folks. And I really, really believe that firmly. A lot of the stuff that I say, I actually, have rocked through this myself and like learned the how not to do it. So yeah, performance and health, and then holistic. Are we making sure that, again, we're just considering all of the aspects of who we are as a person, as a human, multifaceted, and just making sure that we're showing up in a really great space for training, but does that support how we are able to show up in the other areas of our life? So kind of maintaining that holistic approach too. Alrighty. Any questions so far? Okay,
Hey,
cool.
Coral.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What's up, Christina?
Hi. So when you're talking about that, I feel like that hits really close to home for me.
Yeah.
How how do you find balance? Because I feel like I'm failing at that really bad.
No, you're not. You're not. Hi. Love that we have a, a big audience.
Going back.
Man, I balance is one of those things that, it getting really clear on, and Christina, you and I will touch base on this more specifically, in your context this week when we chat, but this is really, I think, where that intentionality and getting clear on what is important right now to support the immediate short-term goal, and squaring that with what is our long-term goal as well. So like, I'm just going to take your case, for instance. You have this awesome foundation that we roll through with a lot of strength focus. And that's really important. And something that sometimes we need to create a little bit of space in the kind of week to week flow to support some triathlon focus or triathlon forward goals. Just to get a little bit more space for a race specific build. And then once that race has happened, then do we remix it and go back to more of a strength forward supported by triathlon or endurance stuff? So we can kind of, I like a kind of dial dashboard visual a lot, because we can have a lot of things present in a training plan but it's just how much are the dials amplified? Like, is the strength dial turned up a lot, moderated? Is it, run? If it's a run focused build, maybe we've got that dial up. And maybe like the swim and the bike might even be turned off for a little bit. So just figuring out what that composition looks like. It can look different throughout the year, depending on where we're at in the seasonality of things. So, and I sometimes think too that like balance is something that it it may not exist for, when we are like all in a particular direction. Things can get a little out of whack, but it's more so the coming back to center that we need to focus on in between these like big chunky focuses, for like finish lines or whatever else you have, that we're working towards so that we can hold space for the people, the passions, the love, things that, we have outside of triathlon. So does that answer your question?
Sorry, it does.
Okay, thanks. That's a really good question.
Thank you. Hi.
Yeah. Hi. Oh, that's a really cool saber. Awesome. Okie dokie. So let's talk. This is actually a really good segue. So Christina, thanks for that question. So let's talk a little bit about timeline. And this is something too that again, this is such a great space in the year. So if you're watching this recorded, like we're in late October, thinking about next season. But a lot of us have some really big, chunky goals. I also will call these BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. You can call them however you like. But sometimes we do need to reflect, like, is this thing that we're wanting to achieve, is this a this season goal? And a lot of times, it can be anything, but like, say you want to do a sprint triathlon. Well, do you know how to swim? Like, that may take a season to be able to find mastery or sufficient skill in that particular area to then maybe it is a 2 year out goal of a sprint triathlon. Same thing with longer distance stuff or high performance stuff. If you are coming back from an injury or if it's your first season in triathlon, throwing really, really high intensity or really, really long stuff, not necessarily what I would advise going straight for, but holding space for a season. Maybe it's even 2 seasons of building your race chops, building your experience, building just this experiential, mass that we have that we can draw on to be really effective, support some longer or higher intensity training that will push us towards maybe it's a world's goal, qualify for Team USA, go, chase a half iron or a full distance finish line. There's a lot of foundational work that needs to happen if we're just getting into the space or coming back from injury, pregnancy, what have you. So we want to make sure that we are addressing like the full scope of things. We just talked about building throughout the season, with Christina's question. Um, you know, the composition of things looks different as we progress through the year based on where we're at, what our goals are, and kind of this like, build and then sort of coming back to center, right? Something else too, and this is a question I do get frequently. What if you've got different race types? So, I'll just throw this out there, as something that I've been asked several times in the last week or so. Folks that want to maybe aim for a 50K, but also do a half iron. I would typically argue stacking something like a half iron first so that you're doing a lot of this like aerobic work, engine building, and then moving into your 50K. Oftentimes that build works really well. There's no one right way to do it. But again, just if you are thinking about a multitude of formats, asking someone who has either done that before, what their experience was like, if it worked for them, if they would advise doing it differently, or, having a sounding board for someone that has, advised folks through this, just being effective with how you're stacking those modalities is making sure they build on one another is really what I'm getting at here. And this other key piece that we keep coming back to is managing your stress bucket. So in short, if you haven't heard me talk about the stress bucket before, we have one bucket, all of our stuff goes in it, training, racing, but also work, personal life, family, partners, kiddos, world stuff, whatever. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it, and we want to make sure that we are accounting for all of these other things that we have going on. And oftentimes, a lot of those things that live in the stress bucket, they also live on our calendar. So let's say this is again, all of these are typically real life examples. We have someone that is expecting their first grandkiddo this year, and also one of their children is also getting married. If you have, or like, if that's a space you're in, or you're starting a new job, or like in school, you've got a graduation, like all of these things demand a lot of energy, attention, time. We want to make sure that, if those are like really key priority areas, not trying to, get in the way of those. And I'm not saying like don't race in and amongst these things, but if they're like big, chunky, like shifty things, can you be a little bit more strategic in picking something that's maybe a little bit before or, down the line calendar wise from these other big things that are occupying space on our calendar? And oftentimes they're beautiful things. And it's just something that we have to have awareness and intentionality around. And then just training load management. We've already talked about this, but riding at this really high, relatively speaking, for you, what's relatively high volume for you, you don't want to build and then live there forever. We need to make sure, again, that we come down from that peak volume, that peak intensity, have recovery, and then figure out, is there another kind of base season in here? Is there like a maintenance mode that you want to go into? So making sure that we're modulating our training load for these race builds, but also for sustainability when we are in between seasons, or like kind of race specific goals. All right. So just a couple, like, I know we've got some first timers, some folks that are coming back from injury. These are just a couple key pieces that I just wanted to throw out there for your rumination, if you will, as you're starting to think specifically about how you're wanting to show up for this coming season. So if it is your first season, what is your background? So this is something that we are, again, a lot of this is going to like circle back. So if this is cyclical, sorry, if it's repetitive, but a lot of these things are just thematic throughout these conversations. If it's your first season, what's your background? Like if you have zero endurance, sport experience, or, not necessarily in recent history, considering that you're kind of starting from, square one, and that's really good to be fully aware of where you're starting from so that you can build progressively and sustainably. But let's say like maybe you've been a runner for 5 or 10 years. Like, okay, that's great. Like, how are you rolling that run experience into your first season of triathlon? Like, maybe this happens a lot. If you're running 3, 4, 5 days a week, maybe you need to scale back your run training a little bit to create and hold space for the swim and the bike. So you can turn down one dial to turn up the dials in other areas. What are your areas of opportunity? Again, for a lot of folks that come into triathlon from a running background, it's a little bit of a shakeup when it comes to especially swimming. Then there's bike stuff too. These are really skills-based pieces. There's a lot of skill set, not to say that running is not a skill, but it's pretty straightforward. Put your shoes on, go forward. And if you work a little bit harder, oftentimes you get a little bit faster. But a lot of times with swimming, we have to really be intentional about setting strong foundations for, our stroke efficiency, how we're breathing. For bike stuff, are you getting a bike fit? What's your equipment like? How do you change a tire? Like all of these things. So like having these really fundamental skill sets that support not only our fitness, our efficiency, but also like Um, our confidence goes a long way to put effort towards those. What sort of experience are you looking for? Are you a compete, a complete, a PB? That's one of the great things about it being your first season. You're gonna have a PB at any distance that you take a crack at. So it's just kind of a fun thing. And then also, think long term. Some folks, a triathlon is just a bucket list item that they just want to check the box. That's awesome. But if it's something that you think you might want to be in this space in the mix for a little while, you don't have to do all the things right now. You can space out those goals in a really beautiful kind of longitudinal way to make sure that you're not rushing, not setting yourself up for burnout, injury, and you're stopping before you get started. So just again, some considerations to think about if it is your first season in this space or first season in a while. Injury, something that I think most people experience at some point in their athletic career. But let's just touch on this real quick. So when you're coming back from injury, and I am going to also, postpartum is not an injury necessarily, but I think a lot of these considerations also apply. So we'll just kind of lump those together. Where are you at in your recovery phase? If you're still under doctor's supervision to keep some rails on it and moderate, please listen to your physicians and your medical team, and don't you know jump right back into where you were. Make sure that we're easing in. Another thing that's just really good to have awareness around: what kind of racer are you? Okay, I've worked with plenty of athletes that are all gas, no brakes. And so if they're coming directly off an injury, we just can't put anything on the calendar for a little while, because they're just going to go, they've got one speed and it is all in, all gas. And that's a really, unfortunately, solid recipe to re-injure before you're back to fitness. If you're someone that can moderate and just kind of go for a low key race experience, and by all means sign up. But if you're that first all gas no brakes, maybe just chill for a little bit, and set yourself up for success is really what I'm getting at here. Something else too that can be really fun, and provide, if you're still in this recovery phase or rebuilding phase, consider, and this is one of the beauties of being a multi-sport athlete, consider different racing opportunities or formats. You can do a relay, let's just say you can't run, which tends to be pretty common. Can you do the swim bike legs of a relay? Can you do an aqua bike? Maybe, the swim is your limiter while you can't run. Maybe you're doing a swim only event. Or something like that. Maybe you're working on your bike handling skills. There's a lot of different things that you can tend to and put energy towards that will give you kind of this forward intention while you're still moderating and managing this recovery or rebuild. So just some things to think about. Any other, before we kind of move on from this, any questions about this segment we just touched on? Okay, if y'all think of anything, let me know. We can circle back. All right, so we already touched on this a little bit, but it's important enough that I think it deserves its own slide. If you have big goals, it requires big planning. Not just from the training side of things, but also just, general life. Let's just say you have a dream to do a full Ironman. Maybe, these are conversations that I think having them early on, you got to let your people know about your intentions. If you're just kind of free rocking solo and it's just you, that's cool. That's awesome. But also, let your friends know. Having support through the journey is really, really key to making sure that our people don't feel jilted or slighted, that, we're dedicating energy, and bandwidth to other spaces. Cause maybe you're not able to show up as frequently to get-togethers, or you're a little tired, and a little grumpy sometimes. Knowing that, those people can bring you snacks to make you happier and more fun to be around, just kind of greases the skids. This becomes a little bit more fundamental, especially if you have family, you've got a, kind of, demanding career, all these things. And then also too, from this long range planning perspective, are there limiters that you have that you can work on for maybe a season, part of a season, with really high intention, high focus, and effort to make sure that you are leveling up skill sets to set you up for the best race day possible when it comes to whatever that big goal is. Um, Again, just because this is something that it comes up so frequently, if you have a goal to do a full Ironman, let's just say, please be sure that, you can do the 2.4 mile swim in your sleep. That should be like, there should be no questions asked. That's just something that I see come up a lot in conversations, especially on the social media spaces. Um, maybe you are spending a season, maybe you're still doing, sprint, half, whatever. But you're showing up to that pool 3 to 4 days a week, making sure that you got that locked. And then you rock into your full Ironman race build 2 years from now, and you are just blowing the doors off of it. Also considering things like this, if you are efficient through the front and middle parts of your races, you know, you've got just that much more energy to tap into to close that thing out strong. Just again, things to think about because there's so much cool nuance and consideration. And this is why I love triathlon because, no matter how long you've been in this sport, in this space, there's always some really cool stuff that we can experiment, play with, and adjust just to show up that much more strongly or fully in whatever space we're working in at that time. So putting it into motion, this slide 2 is also knowing yourself as an athlete, knowing yourself as a person. Some people just like to wing it, feel it out, figure out, wake up, how's my energy today? And they're like, today feels like a run day. I'm going to go do that. Winging it, not necessarily something that I would suggest if you're, have like a big finish line on the horizon, like a full or whatever. But winging it can kind of, and just, this is also more like a flow with it, is maybe a nicer way of putting it. Flowing with your energy. This can work well in a base season, especially if you're kind of on level footing across all three sports. And you have a general awareness of what you've got going on in any given week. You just go, yeah, maybe today feels like a run day. Tomorrow, maybe I'll drop in a little bit of strength, catch a little swim at lunch, whatever. That can totally work, especially in a base building phase. If you are someone that really likes to be under your own umbrella, and, kind of self-guided, self-managed, plus a solid roadmap. And by that, I mean a solid training plan that starts where you're currently at and progresses you to a reasonable volume, intensity that you can sustain over the course of that race build. That self-managed approach can work really well. However, if you're someone that likes having a little bit of either a team approach, a sounding board, having conversation, or you're still learning, maybe group training where you've got like a roadmap specific for a race. And this is something that we do with Team Babe. We're going to do a little bit more of it in 2025, which I'm really excited about. But you still have kind of this like coaching light aspect where maybe you've got a couple one-on-one calls, email support. That can be a really good sweet spot if you don't necessarily want to take the full-on step into one-to-one coaching. The one-to-one coaching really, if you are time crunched, if you're someone that maybe is just getting into the sport or you want to maximize your effectiveness in your training time, make sure you're not setting bad habits as you're just getting into the sport, like with skill sets, things like that. One-to-one coaching can be a really great solution to take the guesswork out of it, reduce your kind of mental load, because you just roll and you're like, okay, this is what I'm doing today. Coach is taking into consideration all of the other things that you've got going on, and it's been calibrated specifically for your life, where you're at, where you're wanting to go, and just kind of what your energy is going to be on that given day. So there's a lot of different ways to take a crack at this and move forward. It just really one, again, reflecting on where you're at, who you are as a person, and what works for you sustainably. And I'll also note it doesn't have to be a solution, like one solution throughout the entire year. Maybe you're self-guided or winging it through the base. And then maybe you're doing like a group training build or one-to-one build for your specific race of choice. So you can kind of, again, modulate as you move through your year or a couple of years with whatever works best for you. So this is the last thing that I wanted to touch on today, and I think we're doing pretty okay on time. We'll have time for a couple questions here in a minute. This is something that I think really also gets lost in the shuffle. Um, and so a lot of what we've just talked about is very, just say, like pretty cut and dry, kind of black and white, linear. When are we swimming? For how long? How many yards? Like, what's the set look like? Like, it's just very metric heavy or kind of data heavy, or just, there's structure. There's a lot of structure. When it comes to defining success for any given season, a lot of people also get wrapped up in that structured way of defining success in, did I hit my time goal? Did I go faster? Et cetera, et cetera. I'm not discounting these are outcome-based ways of defining success. That should not be, those are great goals. Again, those are our anchors oftentimes, but it shouldn't be the only way that we are measuring success because it is a snapshot, okay, of what has been a very long process. So how are we also measuring process and progress along the way? So consistency, how are we showing up? Intentionality, are we showing up for ourselves mentally, putting ourselves forward, in this shuffle of life? That can be a really hard thing for some of us. Also progress over perfection. There's something that I call the 10-minute rule. Even if we don't freaking feel like it, can we do 10 minutes of whatever the given session is? And maybe you do 20 minutes of a 40-minute run, and that's your win. This is like the be a badass everyday mentality embodied. Just showing up, doing what we can. It doesn't necessarily have to be what is prescribed that day. There's a reason that all of these plans are always written in pencil, not pen, because we have to adjust for where we're at mentally, physically, energetically on a given day. So having these like progress and process-based goals are really, really important too. Also, like, I'm going to jump down to mindset here too, because this really has a lot of interplay. Are we being kind to ourselves? Like, there's a lot of times we have this like negative self-talk. Being able to adjust that self-narrative that we carry through over the season is that's like, talk about like that. I would so much rather have an athlete progress mentally than crush a finish line goal and be hypercritical and negative and down on themselves at the finish line, even having achieved, a stellar race result. If we're not kind to ourselves and finding that joy and that sustainability, that curiosity and adventure, like, what are we doing it for? So having that mindset based awareness is really, really important. And also considering that in how we're defining success. And then skills too, like, maybe, your swim. I keep going back to the swim because it is such a hang up for so many people. Maybe when you start your season, you're at 2 minutes 30 per 100, which is super solid, by the way. Maybe you do a bunch of skills work and you're at 2 minutes 20 at the end of the season, but you're doing it more efficiently, effectively. You're able to access your bike and run fitness off the bike. So again, looking at numbers is not always going to tell us the full story. Appreciating these skill sets that we develop, this proficiency in different areas is also really important. Like, did you learn how to fix a flat tire? Did you learn how to open up your granola bar while you're riding your bike. All of these things are, can be difficult, but it's easy to lose sight of those things in the shuffle when we're, tallying up our Strava totals at the end of the year, et cetera. So just again, some few things to think about. Um, that's all I got. Again, I get a little long-winded on some of these things. I hope that this was helpful, but I would love to hear if y'all have questions. What questions have you got?
Coral,
Yes, ma'am.
one of the things that I was thinking about is that we just came off of North Carolina 70.3. While I don't have another big race plan, I felt like we made some progress with the training. I don't want to lose that progress, but I do want to slow down a little bit. What would be a good balance? Because the next race that I have thought about is going to be St. Anthony's. But in the meantime, I don't want to lose the gains I made on the bike and the run, and but yet and still, kind of slow down a little bit or take a break a little bit. But that's kind of what I'm thinking about. Where does that fall between the base and the build and the
That's a that's a really good question, one. I'm really glad that you asked that. So that's that's another really important just awareness piece that if you started one place, you're ending your season at somewhere kind of up the line or up the ladder from there. You have to understand that we can't stay at the top of the mountain forever. It's called a peak for a reason. Okay. So in that recovery space, our fitness does fall off at the end of a race build, going into recovery mode, going into our base maintenance, or skills-based piece of our season, if you want to call it that. Off season does never quite feel quite right because we're not like off for most people. But our intention and our focus changes. So, I think the key thing to just anchor into here is knowing that once you've built the skill set or that power, that strength, etc., even though we walk away from it for a little while, once we've built it, it becomes easier to build back into it the next time we go into a race specific focus. So, if we stay at the top of the mountain for too long and try to hang on, that's where the injury, burnout, etc., overtraining comes in, and shows up. But knowing that, again, having this forward planning, and this is something that you can touch base with your coach around too, is, if you've got some like a coaching balance, if you will, like in your one-to-one work after your race, can you work out like what's a good focus or flow that you can carry forward for a month or two until you resume a race specific build? Yeah, so kind of in that interim space. So maybe it's skill sets, maybe it's general maintenance, maybe it's strength. Again, just getting clear on where your areas of opportunity are. That's where I would hone in on, in between these race focuses.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, great question though. Anybody else?
Is there like a list of local triathlons for 2025 that we have, or like
Not all in one place.
okay.
But I'm gonna write that
Because
down.
that would be interesting because I haven't really thought about planning for I know definitely wanted to do the Babes triathlon,
Mhm.
but other than that, I have no idea what my planning will be. And then I don't know if I'll be here next fall or if I'm going to do my residency up north. I don't know yet. So
Yeah.
it's kind of all up
So
in the air.
yeah, that's a really good, and that's something too, like you don't have to plan out your whole season at once, right? You can like go up to a certain point of the year and maybe there's certainty up to a certain point, and then you're kind of like, it's a little fuzzy on the back half. You can always just feel it out. So don't feel like you have to have a locked and loaded plan for the full year. I oftentimes work in 4 to 6 month blocks. It feels more approachable because I don't know necessarily what my life is going to look like. I mean, I have an idea, but stuff crops up. But Lily, if you were to look at the team racing calendar, it's pinned I think at the top of our Facebook group. It's also pinned at the Team Babe Athletics Insta.
Okay.
That'll give you a good start for, because we have lots of races. I would say that some of them are better managed than others. So the ones that we've selected are going to be those higher quality race experiences locally, for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just catching up in the chat pod. Yeah, Tracy, just getting back. That's awesome. Yeah, just being patient through this process is really, really important. And yeah, Stephanie also made a good point. So like try find Google searches. Try find is probably the one, Lily, I think that Stephanie may be referring to, but if you got another one, Steph, let me know. And then also I think the best way too is just asking people if they have like favorite races that stand out, because a lot of those will show up year after year. We've got time for maybe one or two more questions if y'all have any. We are at the top of the next hour, but I'm happy to stick around if you have any other curiosities.
Hi, Coach Coral, it's Charlene.
Hey,
Hey, so, obvious for I think most people on this call, because most of us I think on here are local, but not sure. Of course, all of our lives were disrupted by the recent hurricanes, right? And so just taking those into account and how to handle, the psychological part of that and missing so much training this last month personally because of helping in my community more and really stepping up my volunteer hours myself, and just trying to get back to base building. But also, what about open water swimming? What do we do about that?
like in the space that we're currently in, but just kind of the after effects. Yeah, it's one of those things. So like just speaking more broadly, I think maintaining, this is actually a slide that I cut just for time considerations, but having this adaptability and flexibility. I think triathletes, if we don't have it when we start the sport, we gain that, develop that muscle pretty quickly. Because stuff crops up, whether it's life or, maybe we've got a couple niggles and we're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that race, or, just this like general life stuff that happens, like a hurricane or, whatever other, there's big stuff that happens all the time that's unexpected. So just holding these big goals loosely, and I think not being so rigid in our timelines is something that at least I've learned for myself is really, really, really critical, to not have so much anxiety around these things. It can help bring us into a space more of joy and centeredness, in alignment that, I'll just share, for example, like when I first moved to Tampa in 2018, I was married. My marriage fell apart. I was signed up for Ironman Florida. I did not race that year, because there's just so much stuff that was happening, and I was not in a good space to support that kind of training. So whatever is happening in your life, I've got that kind of, round two for a full at some later date because other stuff has happened in those years since. But, just knowing that, we will all get there someday. We just have to stay the course. But sometimes we have these, kind of detours or deviations from the roadmap that we thought we would be traveling, but it ends up bringing us in a really beautiful direction too. Like, being able to tend to our community in this time is a really beautiful way to allocate our energy and our time. But I think too, making sure that at some level that we're still holding on to this intentionality of showing up for ourselves, and doing something kind, that is just for us, even if it's not a race-based goal, but being able to go out for a walk or do our strength workout, because physical strength translates to emotional strength and enduring. I could go long-winded here, but suffice it to say that, at the end of the day, a lot of the stuff is not about the finish line. It's really about how are we showing up for ourselves so that we can show up for others. And yeah, it's not always about triathlon, even though that's the vehicle that we're, rocking with it through. So does that answer your question? Okay. Anybody else? That feels like a good note to close on. So it's not about triathlon, but we can bring a lot of attention to the space. Sweet. I'm gonna just stop recording.